you've got your positive thinking that you believe is propelling you forward, but you've got a belief underneath that is forbidding you from moving forward. And that's why we get frustrated. That's why we get stuck. That's why we look at our lives and our relationships and we say, why am I not going anywhere? Why is nothing moving? Why is nothing changing? And that's why. So the law of attraction and things like The Secret are very, very powerful. They've opened a doorway for humanity to understand that our thoughts are very powerful things. But there needs to be a really deep understanding that it's not enough. It's not enough. And there's also another part of it that says, along the lines of attraction and The Secret, that has a belief that says there are positive and negative things that happen to us in our lives. Well, that's a belief system that comes from the ego that says, well, if I got into a car accident, that's bad. If I got divorced, that's bad. If I lost all my money or I got sick, that's negative. All those things are deemed as negative. But from where I come from, and from with the development of my company called Soul Strategies, is that there's a deeper underlying intelligence and purpose to all those negative things that happen to us.
And maybe they aren't actually negative.
They're not negative. You know, my divorce from a soul strategy perspective, and why I wrote the book and really where it has propelled me, was the best thing that ever happened to me. But from a secret perspective, or from a law of attraction perspective, in a limited vision, it says, well, that had to hurt. That was bad. That was negative. And so you attracted that.
It wasn't what you wanted.
It wasn't what I wanted.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes we don't get what we want, but we get what we need. And that's what I needed. So we kind of have to shift our thinking in regards to looking at what's going on in our life and saying, okay, this is uncomfortable, this hurts me, this isn't what I want, but there's a purpose in it.
Yeah, that sounds like a trust issue and a faith issue and some power that's greater than yourself that has the perspective to see what you need when you can't see it, which is different than running your life trying to create from your small, limited perspective and what your desire is in the moment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's brilliantly said. Because in the moment, you know, when you're signing the divorce papers or you're signing the bankruptcy papers in your lawyer's office, in that moment, you can't imagine finding your way through it and seeing the goodness. But the reality of it is if you know where to look and you know what you have brought into that situation and the beliefs that you carry into that and the beliefs that you're taking out of it, then that determines your path. So coming from my divorce, if I had sat and thought, oh my gosh, this is the worst thing that has ever happened to me and I'm doomed and I'll never find love again and all those things that we say. And if that was my belief, then my life would have progressed in a way that aligned with those beliefs. So it is important to think positively and not to dwell in the negative. But it's also really, really important that you appreciate those dark spots.
Right.
You know?
Right. And so with the difference between the thoughts and the beliefs, if the thoughts are things that you're kind of more conscious of and you're hearing in your mind, whereas the belief might be more deeply seated and more subconscious, how do you access the belief to change it if you don't know exactly what it is?
Right. Well, and that's the trick.
Yeah.
Because 95% of them are subconscious.
Yeah.
They're not, you know, they don't make themselves known.
Right.
But the trick is, and the easiest thing to do is just look at your life. Look at what is real in your life. Look at the state of your bank account. Look at the state of your relationships. Look at the state of your health and your body. And reality, what's going on in your world, is a magnificent, what's the word? It's a magnificent, oh heavens, give me a word. It shows you what you need to know. This is real.
Right.
And so if you can look to the state of what you're doing in your world and what happens to you every day, whether you're arguing with your spouse or you're figuring out how you're going to pay your rent, you have a belief about that. Because what you believe, you will create. What you believe, you will see. So that's the easiest way to do it, is just look at your world and say, okay, obviously I'm powerful enough in my own way, in my own energetic way, that I've made choices, I've taken actions, I've met people and chosen relationships that have given me this world, that have given me this life. And the buck always stops with you or with me. I made the choices to marry my husband. I gave him my phone number. There's a choice. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't divine guidance. I gave him my phone number.
Mm-hmm.
I said, I do.
Mm-hmm.
I said, I don't. You know, when you write a check or you go buy a car and you blow money or you buy more stuff than you need, you're making choices in every moment.
Mm-hmm.
So it becomes an issue of realizing that every choice that you've made has stemmed from a thought you've had, and every thought you've had has stemmed from a belief. So I call it the map of belief, because there's a path you can follow. There's a trail you can follow that will lead you to your belief.
That's great. So you're saying we're really responsible for our own bad relationships or difficult relationships, or maybe you're saying we shouldn't even categorize them as bad or difficult. But what if someone finds himself in an abusive relationship? Are they responsible for that?
Well, you're never responsible for your partner's actions. If you're in a relationship where you're being abused and somebody is either verbally, physically, emotionally abusing you, your partner is responsible for their actions all the time, period. But so are you. So where I like to go with that, and what I encourage people to think about, is that if you're being abused, the abuse is not your fault. It's their stuff. But what you do have to become responsible for is understanding what the thoughts were, what the beliefs you had about yourself that would allow you to choose a person who would abuse you, that would compel you to stay if you knew you were being abused. You know, it's a cycle, and it doesn't happen in a vacuum. If, again, it goes back to, I gave my husband my phone number, his phone number. I gave my husband my phone number. Okay? I made a choice, and our relationship was dysfunctional in its own way. But what were my beliefs about myself that made that okay? So a woman who's being abused or a man who's being abused, they have beliefs about themselves that say, okay, you know what? My being abused is all right, so I'll stay. So that's what we need to look at.
So that brings us to the point so many people find themselves in a relationship. Do you stay or do you go? And sometimes it's much more subtle than, you know, somebody who's being abused. Maybe that's more clear. But does your book talk about when a relationship is really worth fighting for, or if it's better to just walk away?
Well, you know, there's an analogy that it takes, you know, you've got to have two whole people to make a relationship. And that's very true. The responsibility you can only accept responsibility for yourself. You can never control what your partner says or does.
Right.
So the agreement to have a relationship that's based on understanding really has to come from both partners. It's sort of hard to be doing this work where you're taking responsibility for your actions if your partner isn't willing to. But it always begins with ourselves. So if you're willing to do the hardcore work with yourself and say, with self-reflection, and look at your own beliefs and what it is you've brought to that partnership, and realize that your partner isn't willing to grow with you in that way, or isn't willing to accept that sort of responsibility, then yeah, you do have a choice to make. And this brings us back to sort of the initial question, was that if our partners aren't here to make us happy, why are they here? What is the purpose of our relationships if they're not here to make us happy? They're here to make us conscious. They're here to wake us up. They're here to show us where we're broken and where we have beliefs within ourselves that don't align with our true potential. And that sounds very airy-fairy. So what does it mean in solid, hardcore context? They show us where our thinking about ourselves doesn't work.